Welcome everyone to Friday office hours. On the last Fridays of the month, this isn't quite, or on the last Fridays of the month, or when we have an extra Friday, we have a topic session. And so the questions, the conversation in these sessions is around a specific topic. And today we're going to talk about payment processing, Salesforce and payment processing. And we're lucky to have a great panel. And we actually catch Corey wearing her IATS Payments hat on her last day in the job, because from next week she will be at salesforce.org. So this is also the last time we catch her on office hours for a little bit as well. So that's great. For those of you who haven't been here before, the way that this works is that if you have a question, please put it in chat first. As I say, today we are talking specifically about payment processing. And so if you have questions around that, please put them in the chat. We may do a bit of show and tell today. I'm not sure. We're more going to have a discussion, I think, and we're sure that we'll get lots of questions about different apps and what people should use. And because there are lots of us on the call, we're up to 38 so far. So thank you everyone who's joined us. I'd be grateful if you could please mute your microphone unless you're talking, answering a question, or unless we call on you for more details about your question. So as I say, put questions, thank you Stuart, put questions about payment processing in the chat first. And although the panel that we have cover a range of things, I know that there are lots of different options, and I'm sure that there are some of you out there who have your own favorites, and will help and contribute to the conversation. So that's enough from me. And TJ is going to start organizing questions. That's great, TJ. So I thought we could ask a little bit. Yeah, we could talk. How do these show up on the screen and in reporting? You mean the questions and the answers, I suppose, Stuart. What I can do is I can keep a record of the chat log, and I can post that into the hub. And I am also recording this session, so that will be posted. And there you go. You actually mean payment. So that's a very good question to get us started. But I thought we would just go in one direction, first of all, because I have to say, in my naivety, in one of the very first Salesforce orgs that I used, I actually did store some credit card numbers in Salesforce. So perhaps one of you would like to kind of leap up and tell me why is that such a bad idea? I mean, you can create custom fields. Why couldn't you just store people's credit card details in Salesforce? Corey, I'm sure you have some things to say about that.
Yes. So as everyone is probably aware of, in the past 10 years or so, there's been an initiative called PCI compliance. And what it is the payment card brands are trying to ensure that every organization who can accept credit cards, any kind of sensitive bank information, credit card information, is doing so, collecting it, utilizing it responsibly. The biggest #1 no-no on the list for PCI compliance is storing clear text credit card information anywhere, writing it down, even somewhere like Salesforce where it's behind a login. You never know what someone could do. A disgruntled employee could download all of those. You just never know. So it's actually a violation of your PCI compliance. So it's definitely a no-no. A lot of nonprofits in the past 10 years or so, when they've really started pushing this out, especially in the United States, have said, well, I'm a nonprofit, my third party company that we work with, they store all the credit card information, they do everything for me. One of the biggest sort of unknown aspects is that every single organization, whether you're a gas station or a nonprofit organization, you have to be PCI compliant and to some level. Now, a company like us, IATS, or any of our other processing partners out there, many if not all of the other payment processors that have apps on the App Exchange, they're going to be compliant to a level 1, which is the highest that you can be, and it means we're a processor, we're storing credit card information responsibly. But a nonprofit organization still needs to be compliant, but probably more at like a level 4 or a level 3, where you're going to just understand that, yes, we know we're not supposed to store credit card information, and if we are, it's in secure ways with our third-party organizations. So long story short, don't write it down, don't store it anywhere, and let your third party do that for you. Make sure, sorry, I'm getting a muted and unmuted thing. Make sure that they understand what your responsibilities are.
I know one area that I kind of deal with a lot is business reply envelopes. We still get a lot of those from our annual mailing, where people still write in their credit card numbers and send that back to us. And so trying to ensure that we process those responsibly and make sure they do not sit around, that they're controlled, is something that's very important.
Exactly, yeah.
Which takes me into let's talk a little bit about, okay, so some of the directions that you could go in. So you say you're still getting credit card slips that come back in the mail. So what do you do at Ashoka? What's your way of, what do you do with those credit card numbers, and what apps do you use?
Sure. So it's just the process. It goes straight from the mail into, like, the person who manages the mail into just one person. So we know exactly where these things are at any given point in time. They're not sitting around. We use form assembly already. So I hooked up a very simple little button on the contact record that pulls open a form assembly form that's integrated with Stripe. So it pre-fills all the info from Salesforce and then does all the custom stuff we need to after submission. So I use form assembly and Stripe for the kind of BRE processing, but since it doesn't handle recurring donations well, we don't use it as our primary kind of online processor.
And I think one of the things that I'm sure that we're going to get on to a bit more of a conversation about this idea of kind of recurring payments. And certainly Stuart's, if we go back to Stuart's question about this sort of batch payments and payments that have to do with sustaining pledges, I wonder whether also we should just clarify that there is a difference, because there is an object in the Nonprofit Success Pack, isn't there, called payments, that and I can see why Stuart is now thinking payment processing in not quite the same way as I have to confess I had thought of it, Stuart. I think what you're meaning is, what do you do when you get a batch of checks arriving, and how do you process them into the payment object? And I think I had more specifically thought about apps for charging credit cards. But does anyone want to talk just a little bit about, there we go, about the NPSP payment object and kind of what that does, and then we'll get on to where you might have to store information about, I don't know, what should we call them, transactions? What does the NPSP payment object do? Come on, TJ, you could talk at this point, because I'm sure you have an opinion.
Yeah, I have strong feelings about the payment object, but what it's designed to do is to allow for a single opportunity or donation to have multiple installments, whether it's a monthly sustainer payment that charges every month, or a pledge or grant that comes in multiple checks, so that you can see the opportunity as the ask, and then the payments logged as that opportunity in a master detail type of situation, where you can see this check-in came in on this date for this amount for this, whether it's a monthly or a pledge payment. So you can actually see the dollars coming in, so the cash-based accounting versus the opportunity or the accrual of, we were pledged this amount, they told us we were going to get this dollar amount every month, and then those payments underneath that. However, it has limitations. As you get a more mature major giving pipeline, you have the need to tag GAU allocations or soft credits to individual installments. And the payment object can't handle that right now. So all of the GAU allocations, any soft credits is done at that parent's opportunity and not at the installment level. So I know I have a lot of clients that they'll get a board pledge for $10,000 and the first check will come in $2,000 from the donor, $5,000 from a donor advised fund, and the rest as a matching gift from the employer from that initial check. And they still want to capture that as being money coming in from that parent pledge, but it's coming from different sources. So it needs different soft credits, grants, often, especially multi-year grants, get very complicated with their grant restrictions that the first year payment can be used for X, Y, and Z allocations, and then the second payment can be used for ABC allocations. So that's where that payment object really starts to fall apart as you become more mature in your giving program. But to just start out with, to keep track of the simple pledge payments or simple grant payments that don't come in at the time the money was promised is where that payment object comes into play in NPSP.
So then, and we'll come back to batch processing. I see questions from both Stuart and Sandy on that. We'll come back to that in a minute, but let's then just make a distinction. So while payments, as you say, can represent the installments, if you are then hooking Salesforce up to some kind of credit card processor, you probably need an additional object as well. And I believe that's how you handle it in IAT, don't you, Corey? Because there's another object that is the record of the actual transaction, the charges to the card.
Yeah, exactly. That's how we decided to handle it. And of course, there can be benefits to that, and there can be limitations to that. So as Sandy posted in the chat, you know, when you have a third party that handles credit card processing or ACH bank account processing, they're likely not going to handle your checks or, you know, cash that you may have received in hand, that kind of thing. So you sometimes you can end up with a system where you have to handle recording of checks and cash in one way and credit card processing in another. So there definitely can be some challenges, and it, you know, I think it ultimately comes down to how do you want to provide reporting to your accounting team, you know, who reconciles your bank account from your third party. Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. And how do you want to handle those other types of payments that are coming in? Yeah, and it can be an individual decision and an individual process that needs to be mapped out for every organization. I'm not sure that there's one perfect way for everyone.
I mean, to Stuart's question that he's just, or what he's just posted, I mean, you could audit the source of the payment on payment, if you were using the NPSP payment object, couldn't you?
Right. So in the case of IAT specifically, what we do is every time that there is a credit card transaction that is recorded or an ACH transaction that is recorded, we will create an opportunity and a payment to go along with it. So technically, at the end of the day, you have all the necessary payment records that you need, but in our case, we have a third-party object that you can utilize just to track, you know, the credit card information. And, you know, you can pull over the method of payment, and there's other fields that you could add to the payment to indicate, is this a credit card? Did it come from IATS? Is this a check? Did it come from over here? So yeah, you would be able to do things like that.
Gaurav, you said you're using Stripe for some things, but not for everything. So are you ending up with, how do you track the source of money coming in? Do you have different objects for different things, or how does that work?
We actually have we have a custom payment object cleverly called payments. We do not use the NPSP. We kind of rolled out in 2008, so before much of that functionality was there. But the structure is pretty similar, and on our payments object, we have a very long pick list of different sources. So we're not tracking which credit card, but we're talking, did it come through Stripe? Did it come through Click and Pledge? Did it come through PayPal? we've got a fairly long tail of places that money comes from. Was it a check? If it's a check, you can put the check number, that kind of stuff. So it's pretty similar in that regard, and kind of why I like my kind of form assembly Stripe approach is that it can create all the records that we need very easily. But we also went for Click and Pledge because, again, everything in Ashoka is customized before any of the standard kind of NPSP stuff existed. I just have a flow that creates the records for me. So Click and Pledge, doesn't know about the stuff we have. It doesn't have that level of customization, but it doesn't really need it, because as soon as we kind of process the transaction, I have a flow that kicks off and creates our funding links, which is our allocations object, and creates a payment, and creates an engagement role, which is our contact role object, and just everything's custom. But it works fine. We got a lot of flexibility that way. So the apps provide the basic core functionality in a kind of standardized manner, and then we do the post processing that makes sense for us.
It's an interesting idea. It's almost like you're using form assembly for batch processing then. That interesting idea that you would take something which most people think of as a tool for capturing information outside of Salesforce, but actually using it as an internal way to direct information into the right places.
Yeah, it's 100% for business reply envelopes that come in, twice a year from our mailings, and it's very much to make a quick process. You check that the address on the contact matches, that they haven't changed it, click a button, and then all you have to do is enter amount and credit card, and you're done. And then you can shred the evidence so that you're kind of all clear. But yeah, we use it, that form specifically is entirely for internal use. We do use it for event register. When we have some paid events, we'll also use form assembly and Stripe, because form assembly is the kind of front end for the event registration. It can handle the payment. So we have a handful of teams that do some, that do paid events, and so it works very well for that as well.
TJ, kind of for the sake of the recording, and because that's kind of easier sometimes for people to come back to than necessarily following in the chat, would you just like to kind of touch on what what's going on here about this idea of batch processing? So I know, thank you, Matthew, for mentioning the Appsona batch gift entry, which is great and is a very useful tool for batching donations, but go on, spill the beans about what you looked at in Florida.
Yes, so Salesforce.org is working on a native batch entry tool for NPSP. They have one, and I'm sure very few people are still using that, but what they've done is they've taken the object for the NPSP import tool, and they're using that object for the basis of their batch entry, and adding a really nice user interface on top of it. And I was able to beta test the UI piece. They're still working on some of the functionality, but in one place, in a nice grid, you get a batch entry tool that lets you do lookups, and I want to say it does soft credits. I don't remember, honestly. I'm going to have to go back and ping Stephanie on that one. I think there was an open question there around soft credits, but the great thing about this tool is you can use an upload from like Benevity or Facebook from an external spreadsheet, upload that into the import tool, and then use this batch entry tool with user interface to review it, tweak any of the data before you actually commit it. And the batch entry is a true batch entry. It doesn't create opportunities until it actually is reviewed and committed. And it'll tell you, based on the number of donations that are expected and the amount expected, whether or not that's correct. It lets you customize templates. It's looking really good. I'm very excited about it. And they're expected, Safe Harbor, to roll it out within a couple of quarters. So I am very, very excited about this. And I'm not sure about the matching to pledges. I asked that question, and I think that was something that they're going to go back and look into. so I'm excited, and I'll circle back with Stephanie and re-ask some of my questions and comment it to the Power of Us Hub post when this session is done about this.
That's that's fantastic. I mean, I remember when the first version of the batch gift entry tool came out, and we all thought it was so cool. But that was even, I think, before payments. So I mean, it's great if it's now going to be able to handle some of those subtleties of the more advanced functionality of NPSP. And yeah, somebody's, you're going to get, we're going to get lots of questions about that. So actually, I have to say, those of you who have questions about this would be a very good thing. The first Friday in April, I think that's the 6th possibly, there won't be an office hours. There's going to be this in the hub Ask Me Anything session with the NPSP product managers. So if you're all keen to know about batch gift data entry, I suggest you get onto that session on April the 6th, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon, and get into the hub and start asking all of those questions rather than us plaguing TJ, who's just seen a demo of it.
Yeah,
so.
definitely ask those questions. They're still gathering requirements because they haven't completely locked down their specs, and they're not ready for true beta yet. So definitely go there and ask those, so that the more they hear the questions asking for the same thing, the more likely it's going to make it into the first release of it and not a future version. So definitely ask those questions there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more they hear that, of the particular nuances and the things that people want in it, yeah, it'd be great to hear about that. So we talked a little bit about this IATS transaction object, and I know Click and Pledge, which is one of the other players in this field, it has a very similar sort of structure. So they have this a custom order object. So I've asked Corey if she wouldn't mind just showing us in a demo org, so that those of you who are not familiar with how some of these work could have a quick look. And then Gaurav has also said he can show us something about what he was talking about. So if you're ready, Corey, I'll make you the presenter.
Sure, yeah, I am ready.
Okay. And Sandy, you can ask questions about the batch gift data entry, but you might be going a little too far if you ask them to link up to a credit card processor as well. Don't push your luck. So just, okay. Corey, just give us a quick sort of high-level guided tour. How does this work if you have credit card transactions that are coming into Salesforce?
Sure, absolutely. So excuse me for the very limited amount of fields you see on the recurring donation here. Obviously, it won't look exactly like yours. This is our demo org that I just, in our sort of internal training org that I just flipped over to really quickly. But here is an example of a recurring donation that we've created just as a standard sort of open type, a $50 kind of recurring open-ended installment type of thing. Generally what happens with our product anyway, is we give the client the ability to have an online donation form where the donor can go and either process a single donation or set up a new recurring donation. All of that data is securely hosted by IATS in our case, and it's going to flow through the IATS system in our servers, process those first donations, or set up the recurring token, as we call it, a customer code, to store those credit card details securely on the IATS side. And that's important because, again, someone like us, we're a processor and we're PCI compliant level 1. We don't want to have any of that credit card data stored permanently inside Salesforce so that your risk goes higher. So what we do is we communicate through Brickwork, our app, and that data flows from IATS into Salesforce. And then if you're using the Nonprofit Success Pack, we will also talk to their records and create those records and link them with our custom objects. So in this particular case, we've created a recurring donation. This is just a manual one that I created, which is why the name is different, but it's just like I said, a standard sort of multiple open-ended recurring donation. We have this button here on the IAT. If you have Brickwork, you get this IATS button. And what it does is it just opens up a virtual terminal where your staff can create a new customer code to store those credit card details and that recurring schedule within IATS and within Salesforce. You can see that this is now relating to one that already exists, so we have an option to update it instead of create a brand new one. But it does display the encrypted version of the credit card information. Now, in our case, this is not encrypted within Salesforce. This is encrypted within IATS, and we're just displaying an encrypted version of that other encryption from the IATS side. But it does give you a good idea as to what their credit card number is, if you need to edit it, the expiry date, etc. So it's related to this customer code, and I can show you that in the related area here. So we have this object that comes with Brickwork called IATS customer codes. And if I open that up, we can see that it represents a copy of everything that is stored over on the IATS servers. So it gives you the unique ID number, which merchant account it's been used for with IATS, which contact it's related to, which recurring donation it's related to. And then we have some other pieces of information here that are just stored on the IATS end relating to who this is for, what card type, and the schedule. So we can see that this is a recurring monthly, it's active, it charges on the 22nd of each month. This represents, again, the schedule and the details that are stored on the IATS end. We also have, back on the recurring donation, of course, the recurring child donations that have been created. What Brickwork does is we allow IATS to process the transactions on their end every day that they're supposed to be charged. And then Brickwork will automatically pull in any new transactions and relate them to the donation each month. And of course, we do a bit of a check. We want to make sure that the stage is an open type, the amount matches, and the closed date matches the date that the charge is going to happen as well. And then we'll automatically change the stage from pledged to posted so that we are letting the system know that it's been collected successfully. We'll mark it lost, a lost type that you define if the transaction is rejected. So we're trying to communicate through to everybody that the transaction's been approved or rejected. So it's pretty straightforward that way. And the terminal is available on the contact or the account or the household or the organization, the child donation, and the recurring donation. And you can just set up and manage credit card transactions. So a third-party app that you install, like Brickwork, and there's others out there, of course, really should give you the ability to set and charge new credit card transactions or even ACH transactions, and then give you the ability to manage those as well. And that way you're ensuring that any stored credit card data at their end, you're syncing it in both places, and you don't have to worry about logging into another system to make changes or edit. Is there anything specific, Caroline, you think I should touch on, or is that a good overview?
That's great. Gil had asked about the DD direct debit, I guess, transactions, but presumably, but everything is handled on that transaction object, isn't it?
Yes. So if we look, I have one here. So if we look at the transactions themselves, this is the custom transaction object that we have created. So when those donations are processed at IATS and they're imported, we create a unique transaction ID. We're going to show you, the currency it's in, if it was approved or rejected, the exact date and time it was processed, and we will actually link this custom object to an opportunity. So a single opportunity if it's a single credit card payment, or a child donation if it's a recurring donation. The contact, the merchant account, etc. So we facilitate creating this extra object, knowing that it's here, you can report on it, but it's not intended for, someone to do a full holistic report on all of the funds they've received for this quarter. You know, there's cash, there's check, there's other things that IATS as a credit card processor doesn't handle for you, which is why it's very important that we create an opportunity, and that we create, or the NPSP will create a payment. Now, IATS does take it a step further, and we're actually going to mark the payment as paid if there's a transaction related to it in most cases. So there are kind of extra elements that you can add that will talk to the payment object, and if your third party doesn't, then you can write that kind of process builder to make sure that it's being marked as paid if it's successful, or written off, or something if it's not. But yeah, so that's why we've chosen to create a separate object for transactions.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We'll talk. We can talk a little bit about that issue with Click and Pledge in a minute, because Gil is saying what we've got a couple of questions here that are about the whole idea of how things update records as well. So it's Gil was saying about updating transactions, and Sandy had a question about updates to contact. I think we better deal with those separately because they're slightly different things, aren't they? So if something happens with regard to a payment, he's specifically asking about a bank cancelling a direct debit. What sort of updates can you make to Salesforce information based on what's going on with the servers and the payment?
Right. So there is the whole question about syncing data between multiple sources. And some processors and apps are going to do that better than others. Some are going to not do it at all. Some are going to do it in different ways. So from our perspective, from the Brickwork IATS perspective, we've tried to make sure that as much as what's happening over on the IATS side, or even our processor side, like for example in the UK with direct debit, that as much as possible flows into Salesforce. Now, we also don't do everything, but that's kind of what you want to ask questions about. You want to think about that when you're deciding on a partner. For the specific returns, or if something like an ACH transaction, if it initially approves on the Monday and you think you got $100, well, what happens on the Wednesday when you get a notice from your bank saying, oh, the bank account actually didn't have enough money in it, it's been returned or rejected? You don't really have that with credit card. It's real time, so you know right away if it's approved or rejected. With things like ACH in America or Canada, or direct debit in the UK, there are delays. It's just the nature of processing. So what IATS does is we will create a new IATS transaction like this one for ACH or direct debit that indicates it's been approved. Because the rule of processing for ACH and direct debit is assume it's gone through and it's successful unless we tell you otherwise. So it's based on exceptions. So they report on exceptions only. So in the case of what we do, we will indicate that the debit was successful. We create it on the day that it was supposed to be charged. We will mark it as approved. But we have an entire process built in to update this should that change in the future. So we actually have a separate object called IATS return. And what this object does, well, I don't have any in here in this demo, but what this object does is it gives you the date that it was returned, the amount, who it was for. If it's direct debit, we're going to give you their direct debit reference number and what kind of a BACS report it came through on. So there's a number of different reasons why transactions or new recurring schedules can reject in the UK. We could talk forever about direct debit. But then we're also going to find the transaction and relate it to it, as well as the merchant account and the stored customer code if we have that connection in the information we're getting back from the system. So what that means is this IATS transaction, the value would actually change from approved to returned, and it would give a return reason, and you can look up and you can understand why it returned. We're going to link it to the more information. As much as we have, we'll put it in here. And the reason why we do that is for reporting, so that you don't have to rely on remembering, okay, every day I need to log into the IATS portal, for example, or go to my bank, or go to whatever processing system I use, and try and understand if something I thought was approved actually rejected. And so that, sorry, was there a question?
No,
okay.
I think there's somebody knocking a microphone. Sorry, Corey, carry on.
Okay. No. So that's kind of the process that IATS has decided to go through to try and update Salesforce as much as possible. And to answer kind of along those lines, some of the other questions I saw in here, when you're making changes to records inside Salesforce, yes, you do want it to sync back to that third-party processor as much as possible. So if you're using Click and Pledge, or if you're using, any of the other ones where you're investigating looking into this type of app, you should ask those questions. If I set up, or if I have a donor who sets up a new recurring donation like this one, and it's set to go, it's $50, I can see that it's going to process. What happens if they cancel it? They call me today. What happens if they want to change it from $50 to $75? How do I make that kind of change, and where do I make those kinds of changes? In the case of Brickwork, you just open up the terminal manually, or we have a batch tool that we came out in the fall that lets you do this to many records at a time. But you would literally just come in and change the dollar amount and click save on the record. And in our case, we update Salesforce and we update IATS. And in the case of direct debit, we're going to update Salesforce, and we're going to update IATS, and we're going to take it a next step further and go out to our bureau, our acquirer in the UK, to make sure that they've got the updated information as well.
But that's for future payments, presumably. It's sort of, there'll be some payments that will be, or installments that are posted, and what you make sure is that the update applies to all the pending installments, isn't it?
Exactly, right. So if this donation from yesterday was marked as posted already and it was closed, and we have a new IATS transaction and a paid payment assigned to it, we would never ever update that record ever again. It's locked down and essentially removed from our purview, because we don't want to edit something that's already happened. So we would just update going forward, in this case, $75, etc., into the future. And so you would want to think about that and ask those questions, and make sure that the app that you want to use gives you that kind of functionality. There's a lot of custom pieces that you can add as well. So if they don't have that kind of work, you could ask them about what they allow you to customize, and try and make sure that it, when you do something in Salesforce, it flows through the system. You don't want to update in many different places.
Corey, can you touch on data storage? Because I know IATS and Click and Pledge, with all of the data on the back end, can sometimes cause some issues with storage for the smaller clients, between the logs, the errors, the transactions. Can you kind of talk about, are there best practices of when to archive or purge that back-end data that's used to create and initially manage these pieces, but may not be needed in the long run, that you can get rid of to free up some storage?
Sure, that's a good question. You would definitely want to double check within your own organization and with any sort of regulatory bodies that you have. For example, I know certain data is required for you to keep for 7 years, at least it is in Canada here, anything related to tax purposes. So you want to double check. But from what I understand, one of the practices that we have here at IATS is 3 years. So we will keep transaction data visible to our clients on our portal, for example, for 3 years. And then we keep it, I believe, for an extra 2 years, kind of sitting in the background in case anybody has a request, we can still pull it. So if you want to have some sort of rule of thumb for 3 years, you could potentially delete or archive or purge, say, your IATS transactions that are older than 3 years. The reasoning there being is you've got an opportunity already. So your opportunity historically can be closed. It's indicating whether you got the money or not. If you want to reduce data, you likely won't need to keep the transaction that long ago. Of course, if you want to refund a transaction that's happened that long ago, you wouldn't want to delete it, but that is something that you would discuss internally with your own org. When it comes to customer codes, you would never want to archive any that are still active or any other type of stored record that is used for syncing between Salesforce and your third-party processor. You'd want to double check with them. But if it was me and I had an old recurring customer code token that is off, that's no longer in use, that was in use for a year and it's been 5 years since they've given to us, I would feel comfortable retiring that and deleting it or archiving it, whatever you see fit. But I definitely wouldn't delete or remove anything within the past 3 years personally.
Great. And we had a question from Sarah about the recurring donations stages. So a lot of clients don't go with the standard of pledged, posted, closed won. They'll have received or unreceived or paid. How easy is it to change in IATS to be able to change those stages and have IATS find and update those as appropriate?
Okay, that's a great question. So the stage is a standard field on the opportunity, and within the setup area, the admin at the org can, of course, modify the stages that would show up in the pick list for your users. And there are different sales processes that you can apply for different reasons. You can have different stages for memberships versus donations, for example. We've got a pretty standard list here with some custom ones from NPSP kind of added down below, or actually maybe we don't in this org. But we've got, oh, there it is, pledged. So we've got the standard sort of list going on here. But you can remove these, you can add new ones as you see fit. From a Brickwork point of view, we have a tab called IATS settings, and this is the main area of Brickwork that's going to control how any donation coming in from an online donation form or ones that are happening inside using the virtual terminal are going to react with the opportunity. And we have 3 different options here that relate to stage. So stage on the opportunity, if the IATS transaction is approved, what do you want Brickwork to apply to that opportunity? And you would just have the option of choosing whichever one you wanted. Normally, we will go with something like a closed won or posted, is a little bit more appropriate for the MPSP situation. If it's rejected, we can use a closed lost. We could have a alert, contact donor or written off or withdrawn or whatever you would like as a closed lost style stage. You can apply for a rejected credit card. And of course, you could just recycle whatever you use today for any other sort of check or if it rejected or bounced at the end of the day. We have this unique third one here for that ACH scenario I was talking about, kind of deals with pending as well. But it's pretty easy to change. You just go in here and then click update.
So that's great, and thank you for. Oh, great! I'm glad that was helpful, Sarah. So yes, there are lots of things that you can customize, and I believe in Click and Pledge you can do something very similar to kind of match your stages. Let's pick up. Go back to a question that Sandy had earlier, and I think what we'll try and do is then broaden the conversation into also how Click and Pledge deals with this, which is the issue of contact information and matching. Because while you're conveniently on the settings page, could you very quickly, because the time is getting on, just say a little bit about how does, when a transaction comes in from the IATS servers, how do you make sure it gets assigned to the correct person in Salesforce?
That's a great question, and one that you should absolutely ask of the app partner that you're looking at. When Brickwork came out a long time ago, we just had the basic option for contact matching, which is email only, which is not recommended anymore, unless you've got some crazy advanced old sort of dupe finding system you've built or something like that. But just finding on email alone isn't really sufficient nowadays. Many people have different email addresses, and you want to find a contact, of course, rather than create a new one. Standard is the main option that we'll recommend to start, and standard is a 3-point match out of 4 fields. So we require a exact match on first name, last name, and a phone or an email field must match. So you're getting a 3-point match, and if they put in their wrong email or a different email, fine. As long as they put in their mobile or cell phone or home phone, you're going to find that match. If not, we'll create a new one for you, and then you can merge them together or use your standard dupe matching to find those. Advanced, though, is every consultant's favorite thing, and it allows you to map up any of sort of the donor fields that come from our online form or from our import process that we have. You can match up any of these fields with any customer standard field on the contact. So a really cool example here is something like a membership ID. So let's say on our Aura form or your the forms that we have, you don't use fax, because who uses fax? You could change this label so the donor puts in their, or the person signing up for a new membership puts in their member ID, something like that. You could have that map to a custom member ID field that you've got on the contact, and it's going to find it with an exact match based on that. Of course, you can change the logic as well. So this gets really cool when you're trying to find contacts. So make sure that whatever app you go with, you investigate what kind of contact match options that they have, and you can reduce as many duplicates as possible.
And Gaurav, perhaps you could talk a little bit to, because Click and Pledge go a slightly different route with this, don't they? Because they create this idea of potential matches and then require you to sort of qualify them, what they call temporary contacts, I believe.
Yeah. Exactly. So they give you the choice. You can have what they call a manual contact creation, which means everything goes into temporary contacts, and they have a fairly nice processing wizard that kind of lets you pretty quickly make sure you've got the right matches and proceed. Their default is semi-automatic, which does match, and they have some match configuration. It's not as nice as what I just saw there in that, and I'm honestly not exact. Like you basically, for each of the main form fields, first name, last name, email, you can kind of choose which fields it can map against. They have this custom alias object for each field, where if you manually match Jim Doe to James Doe, the next time if he puts in Jim or James, it'll match. They do some reasonably slick stuff, but we actually go with fully manual, and so I don't like dupes. So to me, it's worth the, literally 30 seconds it takes to process a transaction to make sure it gets allocated properly. I'm happy to kind of show what their back end looks like. But when a temporary contact comes in, you open. I can't show that because that's real live donor data, and you click on it. It shows you a list of possible, likely matches based on name and email and whatnot. You select it and you click process. And then the rest is I handle downstream using Visual Workflow and Process Builder. So it does all the custom stuff I need. But from that perspective, I think it works well. I think if you want to automate it, it's got reasonably robust capabilities to match. One other thing to keep in mind, though, and I don't know how IATS handles this, but if you have large volumes of data, like over, say, 200,000 contacts, you start to have some limitations in what you can match against unless that field is indexed in Salesforce. Now, maybe I don't know how many folks fall into that category, but if you do, there's some limitations in terms of what you can match against. You'll get what's called a non-selective query error otherwise. So that's something to consider as you're based on the size of your instance, the size of the number of contacts you're matching against.
That's a great point to make. Yeah. We did have problems with that a number of years ago, and it's come up a few times. And I think now our limitation is hovering around, I don't know, 1 million, or maybe we increased it from there. But yeah, we had some issues before where a client had like 900,000 contacts and things were getting confusing. And And also with the logic here, we don't, like personally here, we don't recommend having more than a 10 nested logic. It can just confuse things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there'll be limitations there. So if you're an enterprise level org, it might be a really good question to ask up front, do some testing against the app.
Well, and as a representative of one of those organizations that did have problems, it was never, I think, it wasn't so much an issue of contacts matching as new transactions came in. We had a lot of monthly recurring donations that all posted on like the 1st and the 15th of the month. And there is a process that where you can do an overnight sync with the IAT servers in order to capture the information of those cards that have been charged once a month. And what we found eventually, we had to solve the problem. I believe we were getting errors that the batch wasn't running, or the synchronization wasn't running, and we had to change from the advanced logic back to the standard, which actually, now that you've put any email and phone was enough, and it was switching back to the standard was how we got that overnight sync to run successfully. But yes, I remember a few emails between us on that one, didn't we, Corey? So but yes, so
and to Sandy's question, it's not an API limit problem, because you can import essentially unlimited. Well, our API sync will import up to essentially unlimited numbers of transactions. But what was happening is when the import comes in, Brickworks brain and the logic inside it needs to understand which contact and recurring donation and opportunity donation to build this new transaction against. And so it utilizes contact match if it can't find a match, or if it's in some part of the process, it's looking at the contact match options. So in Caroline's org's case, there was just so many contacts that it was tripping up the logic, and it kind of rejected the whole file, meaning they had to redo it the next day after changing this down to a standard rather than advanced. Pretty sure we took care of that though, so I don't believe it's a problem anymore.
Yeah, we solved it eventually. I mean, that was the thing. After a little while of to and fro about why is this failing, we figured out and then, as I say, yes, you got it working again. And the other thing, what you were saying, the other thing I've experienced with Click and Pledge is quite complex, because there's a difference here, isn't there, that in the case of the opportunity, they are not matching to the opportunity. They actually create the opportunity as well. So there's quite a lot of Salesforce internal processing going on, as well as looking for the aliases. They're also doing opportunity creation. And I think back to your very original question, Sandy, no, the email will not be overwritten. That would be something. This is just information. Am I right, Corey? This is just information that you use to identify a contact record. You're not actually going to update the contact record if it's new information.
Correct. Yeah. When you're using the virtual terminal and you make some changes, it won't auto write back a lot of that data to the contact. And when the contact matching is going on, no, it's just looking for data that already exists. I will take 2 seconds, though, just to point out the Aura field mapping option, though, because, Sandy, this will do what you are asking, where it will update a particular field with information that's come through from a donation form. So, for example, if you have an online donation form and Jane Smith is making a donation, and Jane Smith already exists in your org, and she's moved and she hasn't told you about her new address, she just puts it into your donation form. By default, all that information lands on the opportunity or the recurring donation as she's put it into the form. So we give you this option here, which allows you to select your merchant account and then select your donation form, and you can actually pick and choose fields. I'll just choose one so you can kind of see. It allows you to pick and choose fields that exist on the donation form, and you can choose to have those overwrite, let's say address, contact, and you can overwrite the address. And you can choose when to do it and when not to do it. So by default, we won't do it, but you can set it up so that it does happen. here.
And click and pledges mappings only do this when it creates a new contact. It never updates any information. So click and pledge is always on create only.
Yeah, they have a child object for the address that they'll write to, but yeah, they will. My understanding is they will never update any information. So that's why we do the temporary contact, because we can quickly see whether anything's changed. We capture phone number as well, so if we check phone address, make sure it matches, then go. But you could automate with process builder flow, whatever, from the child object to see if it's a match or not. But like I think most people, it's pretty complex to tell if it's just a typo or if it's a significant change, but you could at least validate that zip has changed or something like that. It is, right. It's not easy though.
But that is one of the nice things about that temporary contact thing, isn't it? That you can see what's just come in versus what you have, and so you can do a certain amount of, as you say, checking for typos and just validating that information that's coming in.
And even if you didn't, I mean, it's something that you could pretty easily report on, and if you wanted to spend 30 minutes a month reviewing stuff, looking for changes, a person could spot them pretty quickly. But it's still the temporary contact forces you to do it kind of out of the box rather than just kicking otherwise you might never get around to it otherwise. So it's I think it's a good solution overall. I think that's one of the parts I think is working fairly well for us.
Great.
And we only have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to mention, because there was a lot of questions on recurring gifts, especially, that if you're looking for a new payment processor and ask them, does it handle recurring gifts, and they say yes, always follow up on that question, because forms that process PayPal, Stripe, that type of thing, they will initiate the recurring and will continue to charge their credit card, but that doesn't mean it'll make it into Salesforce. So if they say yes to that question, it can handle recurring, always do a follow-up of, do the future payments get synced back into Salesforce? Because the question isn't always yes to that second question. So always follow up on that one.
And to add to that,
and also, how do they sync? Go ahead.
Exactly.
Sorry, I think you're going to say something similar.
No, go ahead. Slightly different.
I was just going to say, okay. I was just going to say, do they, depending on whether you use NPSP or not, but does it create a new opportunity every time, or does it add a payment to the opportunity, or does it use a completely separate recurring donation object? And how recurring donations are handled can be really complicated.
Yeah, and you can make a choice. You can choose, are we okay with that? Are we okay with having separate custom objects created that our team will report on? Or do we want to rely more on the objects that are created naturally within the NPSP? This is especially prevalent in a lot of organizations who started using Salesforce before the NPSP, when it was still starter pack or version 1. You built out a lot of custom stuff to go along with your recurring rather than utilize the NPSP. And we can see that changing now, especially since version 3 came out. Another point to make is double check on what they offer for services for recurring donation. I'm an admin inside my favorite charity called the Swampta Family Project, and they use Classy. So as an IATS product manager, I had to learn the Classy system, and I was surprised to find out that they just came out with a process last fall, I believe, to sync those subsequent transactions, but they still only handle monthlies. They don't do annual, they don't do quarterly, etc. So some of the other questions around there is, how you sync, is it a separate app that I have to get? Do you handle recurring for annual or memberships? All kinds of questions like that.
So great. That's great. We are on the hour, and I want to be respectful of people's time. And there are, I think, a lot more details that we could go into. Thank you very much, Corey, for letting us have a look at your demo, and thank you for all the other comments. The thing I had to tell you is that there is an app advice and consumer reports group in the Power of Us Hub. I'm sure you will know about it already, but please go there, because they do have, I believe, a payment processing comparison sheet. You know, these are, while Click and Pledge and IATS are fantastic options, they are not the only ones, and there's a lot of other things that you can look at and try out. But thank you for the tips of the good questions to ask when you're going on this. So